So, we had Attorney General Landry on the show actually on the 4th. We were very surprised that the decision came through that day. There's so many pieces to it here that you actually ended up highlighting. One of them is the judge is actually talking about a sort of, Orwellian nature of what was happening. So why don't we start there? Those are pretty strong words coming from a federal judge.
Yeah, absolutely. He, in fact, describes it as, likening it to the truth ministry in George Orwell's novel 1984. He also describes it as a dystopian scenario. And in court on May 26th, the judge pressed the Department of Justice attorneys to ask them to say, hey, have you ever read the book 1984? Isn't this Orwellian? And the Department of Justice didn't really have a response. The judge posed really specific questions to attorneys representing the federal government from the Department of Justice, asked them, would it be a violation of the First Amendment for the government to stop speech related to vaccine hesitancy or hesitancy about the effectiveness of mask mandates? And the Department of Justice was non-committal. They said, well, it depends. So they have an unrepentant attitude. I think that frightened the judge. They even went so far, the court asked the Department of Justice if it would be a violation of the First Amendment for government to suppress an American citizen's right to question election integrity. And the Department of Justice said, well, it depends. Again, non-committal. And this unrepentant attitude really showed not only that they didn't care that they had done it in the past, they didn't care that they had violated the First Amendment in the past, but they weren't going to take any steps to protect Americans' free speech going forward. And so certainly that necessitated this preliminary injunction, and we're going to keep pushing forward to fight for our constitutional rights.
So what does it mean exactly? I'm going to cover some more of these points that the judge raised, but what does it mean exactly that this is a preliminary injunction? And what is the staying power of what has been decided here?
Well, this will get us to merits discovery. So we launched the lawsuit Missouri in partnership with Louisiana and private plaintiffs. We got into preliminary discovery, had some discovery battles, but we received 20,000 pages of documents from the federal government, from the White House, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, FBI. We have deposed key witnesses to include Dr. Anthony Fauci, FBI agents in San Francisco. They're in the heart of the big tech community. And what we uncovered was substantial evidence. The court called it exactly that the plaintiffs, to include Missouri, Louisiana, and the private plaintiffs, have presented substantial evidence of a likely First Amendment violation. We're likely to succeed on the merits of our claim. And thus that warrants the court order to prevent any further coercion or collusion from the federal government with big tech social media to silence American voices. And now we get into merits discovery. Now we take additional depositions, request additional documents. What we have to do now is root out the entirety of this vast censorship enterprise. COVID was really just the Trojan horse to get the enemy behind the walls. But we know for a fact that this censorship enterprise has spread. It's ballooned so quickly that the federal government had to come up with a new bureaucratic apparatus to manage all the censorship that was going on. In fact, if you look at where it's housed now, the court has said that the likely nerve center of the vast censorship enterprise is in the Department of Homeland Security. So think about that for a second. This is an agency created in the wake of 9/11 to protect Americans from foreign attack that's been weaponized against Americans' right to free speech and a betrayal of our trust and values. And that's why it's important to push this lawsuit forward, get to the merits, and root out the entirety of the censorship enterprise.
You have provided quite a bit of evidence and discovery of the involvement of DHS, but how is it that it ended up in this place?
Well, there's an agency within DHS called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration, CISA. And what we found is that the director of CISA came out and very brazenly said that there is neurological infrastructure. CISA was designed to protect our software systems, our computer systems, and key infrastructure like roads and bridges. But somehow now what they're trying to do is protect Americans' thoughts from things, stories, arguments, things that the federal government doesn't think are true or doesn't think that we should or shouldn't be talking about or hearing. And so that's why they've placed the nerve center of the censorship enterprise there. But we know it expands beyond that. It goes through the CDC, through the State Department, certainly the Department of Justice and FBI. And so all the way to the very top levels of the White House. We have email traffic from the former digital director of the White House communications staff, Rob Flaherty, from March, April, and May of 2021, where he indicates that the requests for the censorship are coming from the highest, and he emphasizes highest levels of the White House. They're implicating President Biden himself. And so this has grown so quickly that the federal government had to come up with a bureaucratic apparatus to manage it because too many different people were contacting social media with requests for censorship.
What has been the reaction basically to this lawsuit? I mean, I presume your office has been fielding a few calls today.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that the Department of Justice is going to continue to fight this. At the end of the day, this isn't about truth. It's about power. There are federal government officials who want power, and they'll pursue that power at the expense of truth. And so, yes, we've received constituent calls that are supporting our efforts. We've gotten a lot of positive attention from people who value the right to free speech. But we also know that Department of Justice is likely to fight us in this case, as they have from the beginning. They fought us on discovery, didn't want us to depose key witnesses. They moved to dismiss the lawsuit, claimed that we alleged too many facts. We filed an amended petition with more than 1,400 paragraphs of individual facts, allegations, and law in support of our arguments. And the Department of Justice said, well, this is just simply too much. Well, if you're censoring that much, then we have to raise to that level of attack. And so it's important to get all of that information in front of the court. So with a full, brush paint the scope, breadth, and depth of the censorship enterprise. So we know we've got a fight on our hands, but fighting for the Constitution is always going to be a fight worth making.
So you mentioned Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the court found here, I'm looking at my notes here, that the motivation of Dr. Anthony Fauci and other defendants was specifically a takedown of protected free speech. So how is that established?
Well, it's established when you look at his correspondence in his emails with key officials in big tech social media. First of all, in the deposition, Dr. Fauci says, well, I don't really know anything about social media. I wasn't really on social media. And then we find a treasure trove of emails where he's communicating directly with top officials at big tech social media. And basically he's saying, look, if people are expressing vaccine hesitancy, we need to remove that content. If people are questioning the effectiveness of masks, that content needs to be removed. Basically, anything he doesn't think is true shouldn't be on social media. And we know that that's government censorship of core free speech. And I would also say it undermines the credibility of what he's trying to do. It's counterproductive. Not only is it illegal, but it actually causes people to trust government less when government is silencing their speech in violation of their constitutional rights.
So tell me a little more about where you think, based on the evidence you have uncovered, that this has spread.
Well, we know that it's spread from the White House through the Department of Homeland Security into the State Department, the CDC. CISA certainly is the nerve center, but we also have reason to believe that the government is now outsourcing some of the censorship to the Election Integrity Program. That's a quasi-public-private partnership, because the individuals at CISA, many of the same employees at CISA who began controlling the censorship enterprise, became concerned that they were violating the First Amendment and thus sought to outsource it to a private entity. But the government can't do through a third party what it would be prohibited from doing directly. And so we're still going to fight to hold them accountable and to root out the censorship enterprise and put a stop to it.